All right, so we're going to get started on chapter 3 and talk about culture. It's a short chapter, but it is really important to understand that there are some things to consider with medications and ethnicity, different cultures, etc. And especially because non-Western traditions are more thought of like more folk medicine, holistic, herbal, really rely on more spiritual type healing rather than medicine healing. So that's all part of ethnomedicine. So it is referred to as folk medicine or traditional medicine. And so what this does, we examine the ways in which people in different cultures think about what health and illness is. So basically, in many non-Western cultures, it's believed that illness is spiritual, like I said before, rather than biologically based. Sometimes illness is thought to be caused by a spirit possession or balance. Remember the yin and yang, loss of balance in the body. Some people believe in magic, astrology rituals, and there's traditional healers. So it's real important to understand that it's not just Western medicine. It's all types of different medicine within our United States, because remember, we have people from all ethnicities, cultures, races, and we all have our different cultural beliefs, and a lot of it stems, the non-Western medicine stems way before even Western medicine was derived. Now we have people with essential oils, and essential oils is actually getting to, many of us Americans that never really used essential oils prior to that. So it is really important. There's also ethno pharmacology. So that's part of ethnomedicine, and it focuses on herbs, powders, teas, animal products such as things that are more healing remedies. And so what that is we're doing research on that to figure out, what works, what doesn't work, interaction. So when we ask people for a medication list, we have to ask them every single thing. And just because they don't say it doesn't mean they don't take it, so we need to make sure we're asking. And then culture, of course, those are just learned beliefs, behaviors, and it's shared by a group of people. It can be, for example, when I'm in Uganda, there's villages, and within those villages they have those certain cultures. And then you have the country itself that has its own cultures and beliefs. There's symbols, there's artifacts, there's all different things that people develop their beliefs on. And it's not inherited, it's just something, it's a belief that you're grown up with. And then there's pharmacogenetics, which we talked about in the last slide set. It's the study of all the different genes to determine how the drug works in the body, and it is known that different races will have a different effect on some medications. For example, we know that calcium channel blockers, that's a type of medicine for blood pressure, works better with African Americans or black people. Then they respond to it really well versus white people. So that's just how that is. So transcultural nursing, as you can see on the picture, it's people from all different cultures. And it was actually an anthropologist that came up with this term, transcultural nursing. And it's respecting cultural diversity. And as you know, we have multiple cultures across the world, and we have a lot in our culture. So it is real important to identify everything that the patient's using. Even teas, there can be some herbs in those, and if they're taking medications, it can interact with some of the medications. So I did already introduce the transcultural assessment model, which is part of transcultural nursing, but there's 6 phenomena that these particular anthropologists base their model on. So there's communication, space, social organization, time, environmental control, and biologic variations. For example, with communication, remember there's verbal and nonverbal communication, and so we have to be really respectful and try to understand that everybody is different. Everybody has different perceptions, and there's multiple variables that bring us to our different perceptions. How we were brought up, what our life experiences are, what adverse experiences we've had in our life, as well as where we were brought up. There's language barriers, so we have to think of that. And within specific languages, there's also different dialects. So when you think about the United States that speak English, we have people in the East Coast that sound different than we do here in this area versus the South, etc. But when you think of people that speak different languages, such as Spanish, there are different dialects depending on what country that they come from. So communication is are really important, as well as how we communicate things. So, for example, if someone, if we're explaining something to a teenager, we're going to explain it differently than we'll explain it to perhaps an adult. We probably will need translators and keep into that account that maybe there's a different dialect there. So then we go to space. Now, I've just known, and I'm sure you guys heard of personal space, right? So a lot of people in different cultures either have very close personal space, you're fine with people getting in your face, or people come up closer within that personal space, and then some people don't like that you getting in their space at all. So you have to really try to get to know the person and understand. Also, a communication style might be different. Like, people can speak in soft tones. Some people avoid direct eye contact, and it's basically intended to be respectful of the healthcare provider. So we may interpret it a different way than what it is because of their culture. Asian Americans and Native Americans may be comfortable with periods of silence, whereas Latin American, African, Middle Eastern, or European may be uneasy during periods of silence. So it's just being cognizant of what people prefer, and we have to make sure we don't confuse being polite with meaningful communication. Oh, that was about the greetings and communication styles. But as far as space, it's basically, do people need privacy versus no privacy? So that can be a challenge. Are people modest? Are they not modest? So there's a sensitivity issue, particularly within Muslim, Orthodox, Jewish, Amish, and Roma groups. A Muslim woman will likely prefer to be cared for by a female nurse rather than a male nurse. East Asians want a pat on the head, or consider a pat on the head to be offensive due to the belief that the head is sacred. So that's just something that I've learned. I did not know that. But I do know I went to Jordan this past year, and we went to some Syrian refugee homes. And so it's customary, and luckily we were taught the customs before we went there. But when you go, you can shake the woman's hand, but not the man's. You have to do a nod to the man. When you go in the home, you sit on the cushions, and you're not allowed to show your feet. You have to sit on the woman's side. And they typically serve coffee or tea, and it's customary to take it even if you don't like it. So that was a challenge for me, because I don't really drink coffee or like caffeine, but I just kind of pretended to sip it and had a little bit, just to have respect for their culture. Also, time, we have to remember that everybody has different times. So when we're on a floor, our time goes fast, but when you're a patient, waiting for that pain medication, your time goes slow. And we all have different time orientations depending on what culture. If you go down to the Bahamas, time's moves really slow. Or like when you go to a restaurant, you wait a long time for your meals, and it's more like la da 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 da. And us Americans are more like fast. Okay, where's the meal? Let's get going. Let's pay. Let's go. And then environmental control. So a major aspect of some cultures is the desire to use nature to facilitate needs of human beings. So, for example, healers, spiritual advisors, ministers, priests, rabbis, etc. So we have to keep cognizant that there can be some other beliefs in that way. And as well as now there's biological variations. We're all different. We're learning a lot about genetic variations between every culture. So this is a good picture that describes the different transcultural assessment model. All of us come from different cultures. I come from a different culture than my neighbor comes from. It doesn't matter really what ethnicity we are either. So I grew up with a smaller family that is not real huggy. Think about that. But yet, my husband's family, everybody hugs and kisses. So it's like getting used to that whole different culture. So it gets really down to details. So we talked about communication and space, social organization, and how we perceive time, and our environment and biological variations. So this helps to, if you know the cultural considerations, this helps to assess, plan, and come up with some nursing interventions. So there's a table on page 34-35, table 3.1, that gives you some examples of what different cultural or cultures that people come from, and it's really interesting to learn, because there's a lot of things that I didn't realize after reading this. If you go through the nursing process on page 35, it goes through an assessment, a nursing diagnosis, planning, and nursing interventions just related to their culture. So if you look at the nursing diagnosis, people can be anxious because they're not familiar with Western healthcare practices. So for example, when I'm on my travels, going to Jordan, I went to Israel, if I was sick and had to go into a hospital, their practices are probably much different than at home, so I would probably feel a little bit anxious. So we have to think about that when we're caring for people from other cultures. And then the nursing interventions would be, let me just see what it said. I just want to make sure I'm using these. Using translators, anticipate therapeutic communication. And the other thing I want to mention is some people like a lot of visitors in the hospital, and some people don't want any visitors. So it's really important not to be judgmental. If someone just wants to be left alone, yes, they could have depression or could have other things, but that's why it's good to have some communication, constant communication, to get to know the patient, because maybe that's just part of their culture. I do know that I work in an area where there's a lot of Italians, and they tend to want to aggregate together. Hispanics aggregate together, so you'll see the whole entire family come in at one time. So anyways, just to keep that into consideration. All right, and that's it on this chapter.